My child. Come closer. Be still for a moment. Because this message is not arriving by accident. And before you dismiss it, before you convince yourself it is meant for someone else, I want you to listen carefully. Not with your ears. With your heart. Because there is a pattern I have been watching. A pattern that many people do not notice until much later. A pattern of waiting. Waiting to make the call. Waiting to send the message. Waiting to repair the relationship. Waiting to say the words. Waiting to show appreciation. Waiting to express love. Waiting for a better time. Yet, my child, the better time people keep waiting for often looks exactly like today. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, do not postpone what matters most. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. Perhaps there is someone you care about. Someone whose name immediately entered your mind when this message began. A son. A daughter. A brother. A sister. A friend. A spouse. Someone who matters deeply. Yet somehow, distance appeared. Not necessarily physical distance. Emotional distance. The kind that forms slowly. Quietly. Almost invisibly. Until one day people realize they have not spoken honestly in a very long time. Jesus speaks softly. Love grows stronger when it is expressed. Think about that carefully. Because somebody listening needed exactly that reminder tonight. The truth is, many people spend years preparing for things that may never happen, while neglecting things that matter every single day. A conversation. A thank you. A moment of appreciation. A moment of forgiveness. A moment of kindness. My child, do not overlook these things, because they matter more than you realize. As you reflect on this message, you may notice the QR code on screen or the link provided nearby. For some people, those resources become places for prayer, reflection, encouragement, and uplifting conversations. Others prefer private reflection. Both approaches can be meaningful. What matters most is continuing to nourish hope, gratitude, wisdom, and connection. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, what you give your attention to becomes stronger. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. The evening grew quieter. The house became still. And somewhere, someone sat alone wondering whether they mattered. Someone wondering whether anyone appreciated them. Someone wondering whether anyone noticed. Perhaps that person is closer than you think. Perhaps that person is someone you love. Perhaps that person is even you. Jesus speaks softly. Every heart needs encouragement. Feel that deeply. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. And before this message ends, I want you to consider one question. A simple question. Yet a powerful one. If there were no fear. If there were no pride. If there were no uncertainty. Who would you reach out to today? The answer matters. Because sometimes the smallest action creates the greatest change. You may again notice the QR code or link connected to this message. Some people use those resources as a place to continue reflecting, reading encouraging messages, or spending quiet time in prayer and gratitude. Others continue their journey privately. Both paths can be meaningful. Because growth often begins with a moment of reflection. And perhaps that moment is happening right now. Then something unexpected happened. A folded note slipped from an old book resting nearby. A note that had been hidden for years. Across the front were words that instantly made his heart race. The person you need to speak to already left you a message. The room became completely silent. Because suddenly, everything changed. Comment this word if this message reached your heart. Hope. And type Part 2. Because Part 2 reveals the hidden message, and why it remained undiscovered for so many years. Part 2. The message that waited years to be found. My child. Stay here. Do not rush past this moment. Because after discovering the words, the person you need to speak to already left you a message. He could not move. Not immediately. Not for several seconds. The room became completely silent. The old book remained open. The folded note rested in his hands. And suddenly, a strange feeling filled his heart. Not fear. Not confusion. Recognition. Because somehow, those words felt familiar. As though a part of him already knew exactly who the message belonged to. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, some answers arrive long after the questions were first asked. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. The evening light stretched across the room. Shadows slowly moved across the floor. Everything appeared ordinary. Yet inside, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Because suddenly, he was no longer thinking about the note. He was thinking about people. The people who shaped his life. The people whose voices still lived inside his memories. The people whose advice still guided him years later. The people he wished he had thanked more often. Jesus speaks softly. The impact of a kind word often lasts longer than the speaker ever knows. Think about that carefully. Because somebody listening needed exactly that reminder tonight. His hands trembled slightly as he unfolded the paper. The note looked old. Very old. The edges had yellowed. The handwriting had faded. Yet the words remained clear. Across the top was a simple sentence. If you are reading this, then the time has finally come. The room became completely silent. Because somehow, those words felt personal. Very personal. Almost as if the writer knew this exact moment would arrive. Archangel Michael says, My child, timing often makes ordinary words become extraordinary. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. He continued reading. The next line immediately stopped him. You have spent too much time doubting yourself. The room became completely silent. Because suddenly, it felt as though the message was speaking directly into his life. Not generally. Specifically. Personally. Truthfully. For years, he had questioned himself. Questioned decisions. Questioned opportunities. Questioned possibilities. Questioned whether he was capable enough. Qualified enough. Ready enough. And perhaps somebody listening understands exactly what that feels like. Jesus speaks softly. Many people judge themselves more harshly than anyone else ever would. Feel that deeply. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. He continued reading. Line after line. Paragraph after paragraph. Each one seemed to describe a struggle he rarely discussed. A struggle hidden behind daily routines. Hidden behind responsibilities. Hidden behind years of appearing strong. The message continued. The future you fear may never arrive. But the opportunities you avoid because of fear may never arrive either. He immediately stopped reading. Because suddenly, those words hit differently. Very differently. The room remained silent. The clock continued ticking. The sunlight continued fading. Yet inside, something was changing. Perspective. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, fear often asks, what if it goes wrong? Wisdom asks, what if it goes right? Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly that reminder tonight. For a moment, He looked away from the letter. His eyes landed on a small card resting near the edge of the table. The card contained familiar words. Return often to what strengthens hope. He smiled softly. Because somehow, that reminder kept appearing. Again and again. Throughout the journey. Some viewers may notice the QR code on screen, or the link available with this message. For some, those resources become places for reflection. Prayer, encouragement, gratitude, and uplifting conversations. Others choose private reflection. Both paths can be meaningful. Because growth often begins when people intentionally spend time with ideas that strengthen hope. He returned to the note. And then, he discovered something unexpected. A second page. Folded behind the first. Hidden carefully. Almost as if it was meant to be found later. The moment he unfolded it, his heart immediately started racing. Because unlike the first page, this page contained a title. A title written in large letters. Impossible to ignore. The title read, The Thing You Have Forgotten. The room became completely silent. Because suddenly, the mystery deepened. What had he forgotten? A memory? A lesson? A promise? A dream? Archangel Michael speaks. My child, some of the most important things are not lost. They are simply forgotten. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. He continued reading. The second page contained only one paragraph. Yet somehow, it carried more weight than everything else. The paragraph read, You have spent years remembering your mistakes and forgetting your victories. The room became completely silent. Because suddenly, he realized it was true. He remembered failures easily. Disappointments easily. Regrets easily. Yet somehow, he rarely remembered the obstacles he overcame. The difficult seasons he survived. The challenges he conquered. The moments he kept going when giving up would have been easier. Jesus speaks softly. The strength that carried you this far has not disappeared. Think about that carefully. Because somebody listening needed exactly that reminder tonight. As the evening continued, the message seemed less like a letter, and more like a mirror, reflecting things he had not seen clearly for years. The note was not revealing new information. It was revealing forgotten truth. And suddenly, he understood why the message remained hidden for so long. Not because it was difficult to find. Because he was not ready to understand it earlier. Some viewers may once again notice the QR code or link connected to this message. For some, it serves as a place to continue reflecting, praying, reading encouraging thoughts, and reconnecting with perspective. Others continue their reflection privately. Both choices are meaningful. Because sometimes the greatest changes begin quietly. Not through dramatic events, but through deeper understanding. Then, just as he reached the bottom of the second page, he noticed one final sentence. A sentence written smaller than everything else. A sentence so easy to miss that most people would have overlooked it. The sentence read, The third page is hidden inside the photograph. His heart immediately began racing. Because suddenly, there was another clue. Another layer. Another mystery. And somehow, he already knew. The photograph would reveal something he was never expecting. Comment this word if this message reached your heart. Remember. And type. Part 3. Because Part 3 reveals the hidden photograph, and the forgotten promise that changes everything. Writing. Part 3. The photograph that held a promise he had completely forgotten. My child. Stay here. Because after reading the words, the third page is hidden inside the photograph, He immediately stopped reading. The note remained open. The second page remained unfolded. The room remained silent. Yet his thoughts were racing. Because suddenly, a memory returned. A very specific memory. A memory connected to an old photograph he had not seen in years. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, some memories return when the heart is finally ready to learn from them. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. The evening continued growing darker. The shadows stretched across the room. The clock continued ticking. Yet his attention remained fixed on the same question. Which photograph? He knew there were hundreds. Family photographs. Vacation photographs. Old pictures stored in albums. Pictures stored in drawers. Pictures stored in boxes. Yet somehow, one particular photograph immediately came to mind. A photograph taken many years ago. A photograph he had not thought about in a very long time. Jesus speaks softly. When something important needs to be remembered, the right memory often arrives first. Think about that carefully. Because somebody listening needed exactly that reminder tonight. Without fully understanding why, he walked toward the hallway closet. The closet where old family albums had been stored for years. He opened the door. Dust drifted through the air. Several boxes rested on the shelves. Memories from another season of life. Memories rarely revisited. Memories almost forgotten. And suddenly, his eyes landed on a blue photo album. The same album he had been thinking about. The room became completely silent. Because immediately, he knew. This was it. Archangel Michael says, My child, some discoveries begin the moment you trust the feeling guiding you forward. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. He carried the album to the table, opened it carefully, and began turning pages. One photograph after another. Family gatherings. Birthdays. Celebrations. Ordinary moments. Beautiful moments. Moments nobody realized would become precious years later. Jesus speaks softly. Time has a way of transforming ordinary moments into treasured memories. Feel that deeply. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. Page after page passed. Then suddenly, he found it. The photograph. The one memory that returned earlier. The one picture that immediately felt different. A picture taken many years ago. A younger version of himself standing outside. Smiling. Holding a notebook. Looking toward the future. The room became completely silent. Because suddenly, everything felt connected. The notebook. The letter. The message. The forgotten promise. All of it. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, sometimes the person you need to remember is the person you once were. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly that reminder tonight. He removed the photograph from the album. Turned it over. And immediately froze. Because tucked behind the photograph, there was something hidden. A folded page. A third page. Exactly as the note described. His heart immediately began racing. Not because he expected a miracle. Not because he expected a secret. Because suddenly, the mystery was real. The folded page looked old. Very old. Yet somehow, perfectly preserved. As if someone intended for it to survive. As if someone knew it would eventually be found. Jesus speaks softly. Some lessons wait patiently for the right season. Think about that carefully. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. He carefully unfolded the paper. The handwriting looked familiar. almost painfully familiar. And then he realized why. It was his own handwriting. The room became completely silent. Because suddenly, everything changed. This was not a message from someone else. It was a message from himself. A message written years ago. A message intended for a future version of himself. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, wisdom sometimes comes from the person you used to be. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. The first sentence immediately caught his attention. If you are reading this, then you are older than I am. The room became completely silent. Because somehow, that sentence felt powerful. The younger version of himself speaking across time. The younger version of himself reaching toward the future. The younger version of himself hoping to be heard. He continued reading. The next line stopped him completely. I hope you didn't forget what matters most. The room became completely silent. Because suddenly, that question felt impossible to ignore. What did matter most? Had he forgotten? Had life become so busy that important things slowly slipped away? Responsibilities, schedules, deadlines, obligations. Sometimes they quietly crowd out the things people once valued deeply. Jesus speaks softly. Many people remember their responsibilities and forget their purpose. Feel that deeply. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. As he continued reading, his eyes landed on another familiar reminder card resting nearby. Return often to what strengthens hope. He smiled softly. Because once again, the same message appeared. Hope, reflection, prayer, encouragement, perspective. The things people need when life becomes noisy. Some viewers may notice the QR code on screen or the link associated with this message. For some, those resources become places to find reflection materials, encouraging conversations, gratitude practices, prayer resources, and personal growth content. Others continue their reflection privately. Both approaches can be meaningful. Because growth often begins when people intentionally reconnect with hope. He returned to the page. And then, he reached the section that changed everything. The section titled, The Promise. His heart immediately started racing. Because suddenly, he understood. The forgotten promise. The thing mentioned earlier. The thing hidden for years. The thing waiting to be remembered. The promise read, no matter what happens, never become someone who stops believing growth is possible. The room became completely silent. Because suddenly, those words felt deeply personal. Very personal. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, growth remains possible as long as hope remains alive. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. The page continued. And then, at the very bottom, he discovered one final sentence. A sentence written smaller than everything else. A sentence that immediately made his heart race. The sentence read, the final message is hidden inside the wooden box in the attic. The room became completely silent. Because suddenly, the journey was not over. Not yet. Another clue. Another layer. Another discovery waiting. And somehow, he knew. Whatever was hidden inside that wooden box would explain why all of these messages existed in the first place. Comment this word if this message reached your heart. Growth. And type. Part 4. Because Part 4 reveals the wooden box, and the final message that waited years to be discovered. Part 4. The wooden box that waited in silence for years. My child. Stay here. Because after reading the words, The final message is hidden inside the wooden box in the attic. He could not focus on anything else. Not the photograph. Not the letter. Not the promise. Not even the memories. Because suddenly, everything pointed toward one final place. The attic. The same attic he had not entered in years. The same attic where forgotten objects quietly collected dust. The same attic where pieces of the past remained untouched. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, some treasures are not hidden because they are lost. They are hidden because the time has not yet come. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. The evening sky darkened outside. The house became quiet. The hallway lights cast long shadows across the floor. Yet inside his heart, something was becoming clearer. Not certainty. Not complete understanding. But direction. And sometimes direction is enough. Jesus speaks softly. You do not need to see the entire path to take the next step. Think about that carefully. Because somebody listening needed exactly that reminder tonight. Slowly, he walked toward the attic stairs. Each step creaked softly beneath his feet. Each step felt strangely significant. Almost symbolic. As though he was not climbing toward an attic, but toward understanding. Toward perspective. Toward something he had forgotten about himself. The attic door opened. Dust floated through the air. The smell of old wood filled the room. Moonlight filtered through a small window. Everything appeared exactly as he remembered. And yet, everything felt different. Because tonight he was not here to store memories. He was here to uncover one. Archangel Michael says, My child, understanding often waits where people least expect to find it. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. The attic contained dozens of boxes. Large boxes. Small boxes. Old furniture. Storage containers. Years of memories. Years of stories. Years of moments. And somewhere among them, one wooden box. The box. The final clue. The final message. The final piece of the journey. He searched carefully. Not rushing. Not guessing. Trusting the process. Trusting the clues. Trusting that each discovery had led him exactly where he needed to be. Jesus speaks softly. Patience reveals what haste often overlooks. Feel that deeply. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. Minutes passed. Then suddenly, he saw it. Near the far wall. Partially hidden behind an old chair. A wooden box. Simple. Ordinary. Unremarkable. Yet somehow, he immediately knew. The room became completely silent. Because sometimes the heart recognizes something before the mind understands why. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, not every important thing appears impressive at first glance. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly that reminder tonight. He carried the box toward the center of the attic. Placed it beneath the moonlight. And carefully examined it. The wood showed signs of age. The corners were worn. The surface carried small marks from years gone by. Yet one detail immediately caught his attention. Words. Words carved into the lid. Simple words. Yet powerful. The words read, Open only when you are ready to see differently. The room became completely silent. Because suddenly, those words explained everything. The letters. The photograph. The journal. The clues. This journey was never about finding information. It was about changing perspective. Jesus speaks softly. Sometimes the answer people seek is not a new fact. It is a new way of seeing. Think about that carefully. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. For several moments, he simply stared at the box. Then finally, he lifted the lid. Inside were several items. A notebook, a folded page, a small key, and an envelope. The envelope immediately stood out, because unlike everything else, it carried his name, written clearly across the front. As if someone knew he would eventually find it. As if someone knew this exact moment would arrive. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, some messages survive because they were meant to reach you. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. Before opening the envelope, his eyes landed on a familiar card resting beneath it. A card carrying words he had seen throughout this journey. Return often to what strengthens hope. He smiled softly. Because now he understood. Hope was not merely optimism. Hope was attention. Hope was perspective. Hope was remembering what matters. Some viewers may notice the QR code on screen or the link associated with this message. For some, those resources become places for reflection, prayer, encouraging conversations, gratitude practices, and reminders to remain connected to hope and purpose. Others continue their reflection journey privately. Both approaches can be meaningful. Because meaningful growth often begins with intentional reflection. He returned his attention to the envelope. Slowly. Carefully. Almost reverently. Then he opened it. The paper inside looked different from everything else. Newer somehow. More personal. More direct. And the very first sentence immediately made his heart race. The sentence read, If you found this box, you have already changed. The room became completely silent. Because suddenly, everything shifted. The message was not about the future. It was about the present. It was about who he had become, who he was becoming, and who he still had the opportunity to be. Jesus speaks softly. Growth becomes visible when people pause long enough to notice it. Feel that deeply. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. He continued reading. Line after line. Paragraph after paragraph. And every word pointed toward the same truth. Not achievement. Not wealth. Not status. Character. Wisdom. Gratitude. Purpose. The things that remain valuable regardless of circumstances. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, the most important victories are often invisible to the world. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly that reminder tonight. Then, near the bottom of the page, he discovered a heading. A heading unlike anything he had seen before. Written in large letters. Impossible to ignore. The heading read, The Final Question. His heart immediately began racing. Because somehow, he knew, everything had been leading toward this moment. The letters. The photograph. The journal. The box. The memories. The promises. Everything. The final question waited beneath the heading. Hidden by a folded section of paper. Waiting. Patiently. Silently. For the exact moment he was ready to read it. The room became completely silent. Because suddenly, the answer mattered less than the question. Comment this word if this message reached your heart. Perspective. And type. Part 5. Because Part 5 reveals the final question, and the answer that changes everything he believes about his future. Part 5. The final question that changed everything. My child. Stay here. Because after discovering the heading, the final question, He did not unfold the page immediately. Not because he was afraid. Not because he was uncertain. Because suddenly, he understood something. This journey had never been about reaching the end. It had been about becoming the person capable of understanding the ending. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, some answers become meaningful only after the heart has been prepared to receive them. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. The attic remained silent. Moonlight continued shining through the window. The wooden box remained open. The old photograph rested nearby. The letters remained spread across the floor. Every clue, every message, every reminder, all leading here to one final question. Jesus speaks softly. Wisdom is not measured by the number of answers you possess. It is measured by the quality of the questions you ask. Think about that carefully. Because somebody listening needed exactly that reminder tonight. Slowly, he unfolded the final section of paper. The room became completely silent. Because somehow, he already sensed this question would be different. Not a puzzle. Not a mystery. Not a challenge. Something deeper. Something personal. Something impossible to ignore. His eyes moved across the page. And there, written alone in the center, appeared the question. The final question. The question that everything had been leading toward. The question read, what would change if you truly believed your life still matters? The room became completely silent. Because suddenly, everything stopped. The attic. The memories. The search. The clues. None of it mattered anymore. Only the question. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, some questions do not test your knowledge. They reveal your beliefs. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. For several moments, he stared at the page, reading the question again, and again, and again. Because suddenly, he realized something. For years, he had been living as though his most important chapters were behind him. As though his opportunities had already passed. As though his greatest contributions had already been made. As though growth belonged to younger people. As though purpose belonged to another season. Yet the question challenged every one of those assumptions. Jesus speaks softly. The future does not belong only to the young. It belongs to anyone willing to continue growing. Feel that deeply. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. He sat quietly, reflecting, remembering, thinking, and for the first time, he answered honestly. If he truly believed his life still mattered, he would stop postponing meaningful things. He would stop talking himself out of possibilities. He would stop assuming it was too late. He would stop measuring himself only by what remained unfinished. Instead, he would begin noticing everything that was still possible. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, possibility rarely disappears. People simply stop looking for it. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly that reminder tonight. As the realization settled into his heart, he noticed another page beneath the question. A final page. The last page. The page that had remained hidden beneath everything else. Across the top were words he would never forget. The words read, the answer. The room became completely silent. Because suddenly, the journey was reaching its conclusion. Slowly, he lifted the page, and discovered something unexpected. There was no complicated answer. No secret formula. No mysterious revelation. Only a single paragraph. A paragraph written with extraordinary simplicity. The paragraph read, "Your life matters every time you encourage someone. Your life matters every time you choose kindness. Your life matters every time you keep hope alive. Your life matters every time you help another person believe they can continue. Your life matters more than you realize." The room became completely silent. Because suddenly, the answer felt obvious and profound. At the same time, Jesus speaks softly. Purpose is often found in ordinary acts performed with extraordinary love. Think about that carefully. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. The search was over. The mystery was solved. The clues had been revealed. Yet something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling finished, he felt inspired. Inspired to reconnect. Inspired to encourage. Inspired to appreciate. Inspired to live more intentionally. Because the journey had not given him a new future. It had given him a new perspective on the future he already had. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, perspective transforms everything it touches. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. Before leaving the attic, he gathered the letters, the photograph, the journal, the notes, the reminders, and carefully placed them back inside the wooden box. Not because he wanted to hide them, because he wanted to preserve them. For future days. For future reflections. For future reminders. As he prepared to close the lid, his eyes landed one final time on the familiar message that had appeared throughout the journey. Return often to what strengthens hope. He smiled. Because now he understood. Hope was not a destination. Hope was a practice. A choice. A perspective. A way of seeing. Some viewers may notice the QR code on screen or the link associated with this message. For some, those resources become places for reflection, prayer, encouragement, gratitude practices, and conversations centered on hope and personal growth. Others continue their journey privately. Both choices can be meaningful. Because growth often begins with a simple moment of reflection. He closed the box, turned off the attic light, and began walking downstairs. But before reaching the bottom step, he stopped. Because suddenly, one final thought entered his mind. A thought that somehow summarized the entire journey. The thought was simple, yet powerful. It was this. Perhaps the greatest treasure was never hidden in the box. Perhaps the greatest treasure was the person I became while searching for it. The house became completely silent. Because suddenly, that was the answer. The real answer. The answer behind every clue. Every letter. Every memory. Every question. Every discovery. And perhaps, it is the answer somebody listening needed tonight as well. Comment this word if this message reached your heart. Hope. And type. Final chapter. Because the final chapter reveals what happened after he shared the story with his family, and why one unexpected conversation changed their future forever. Final chapter. The story he shared that changed the entire family. My child. Stay here. Because after realizing, perhaps the greatest treasure was the person I became while searching for it, he stood silently at the bottom of the stairs. The attic was behind him. The wooden box was closed. The clues had been solved. The mystery had ended. Yet somehow, it felt like something was only beginning. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, the most important endings are often disguised beginnings. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. The house was quiet. The evening had settled in. Soft light filled the rooms. Everything looked normal. Ordinary. familiar. Yet inside his heart, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Because for the first time in years, he felt different. Not younger. Not wealthier. Not more successful. More awake. More aware. More grateful. More present. Jesus speaks softly. A grateful heart notices treasures that rushed eyes overlook. Think about that carefully. Because somebody listening needed exactly that reminder tonight. For several minutes, he sat alone in the living room, looking at the wooden box resting beside him, thinking about the letters, thinking about the photograph, thinking about the promise, thinking about the final question. And suddenly, he realized something. None of those discoveries were meant to stay with him alone. Some lessons become meaningful only when they are shared. Archangel Michael says, "My child, wisdom grows stronger when it is passed forward." Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. One by one, his family gathered in the room. The atmosphere felt peaceful, comfortable, unhurried. The kind of evening people often forget. Yet years later, those same evenings become the ones people remember most. Because ordinary moments often become extraordinary memories. Jesus speaks softly. Life is not built only from milestones. It is built from moments. Feel that deeply. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. The family sat together, talking, laughing, sharing stories. And eventually, someone noticed the wooden box. A simple question followed. What's inside? The room became completely silent. Because suddenly, he had a choice. He could keep everything private. Or he could share the journey. Slowly, he smiled. Then opened the box. And began telling the story. The letters. The journal. The photograph. The hidden notes. The forgotten promise. The final question. Everything. Archangel Michael speaks. My child, your experiences often contain lessons someone else needs. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly that reminder tonight. At first, the family listened quietly, curiously, patiently. Then something unexpected happened. As the story continued, people stopped focusing on the clues, stopped focusing on the mystery, stopped focusing on the objects. Instead, they focused on themselves. Because every person in the room recognized something familiar. A dream they had postponed. A goal they had forgotten. A conversation they had avoided. A possibility they had quietly abandoned. Jesus speaks softly. The stories that touch hearts are often the stories that reveal truth. Think about that carefully. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. The conversation continued for hours. Not because anyone planned it. Because nobody wanted it to end. One family member shared an old dream. Another shared a regret. Another shared a goal. Another shared a hope. And for the first time in a very long time, everyone spoke honestly. Not about achievements. Not about appearances. Not about expectations. About purpose. About growth. About what truly mattered. Archangel Michael says, My child, honest conversations build stronger foundations than perfect appearances. Pause there. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. As the evening continued, the atmosphere changed. Not dramatically. Quietly. Yet unmistakably. People listened more carefully. Encouraged one another more openly. Appreciated one another more deeply. Because suddenly, everyone understood something important. Time is valuable. Relationships are valuable. Opportunities are valuable. Yet perhaps most valuable of all is perspective. Jesus speaks softly. The same life can feel completely different when viewed through gratitude. Feel that deeply. Because somebody listening needed exactly those words tonight. At one point, his daughter looked toward the photograph. The same photograph that started the final stage of the journey. Then she asked a question. A simple question. Yet somehow, the most important question of the entire evening. She asked, "If you could send one message to your younger self, what would it be?" The room became completely silent. Because suddenly, everyone wanted to know the answer. He thought carefully. Very carefully. Then finally spoke. "I would tell him not to be afraid of becoming who he was meant to become." The room became completely silent. Because somehow, those words reached everyone. Not only his younger self. Everyone listening. Archangel Michael speaks. "My child, fear often delays growth, but it cannot stop it for the reminder that life is not measured only by what people achieve. It is also measured by what they appreciate, by what they share, by how they encourage others, by how they choose to live." Some viewers may notice the QR code on screen or the link associated with this message. For some, those resources become places for reflection, prayer, encouragement, gratitude practices, and thoughtful conversations. Others continue their reflection journey privately. Both paths can be meaningful, because growth often begins with a single moment of honest reflection. Before going to sleep, he opened the wooden box one final time, looked at everything inside, then added one final note. A note meant for whoever might someday find it. The note read, "Do not search for treasure. Search for perspective. Treasure changes circumstances. Perspective changes lives." The box closed. The lights turned off. The journey ended. Yet the lesson remained. And perhaps that lesson was the real treasure all along. Archangel Michael speaks. "My child, never underestimate the power of hope, gratitude, and a willing heart." And if this message reached your heart, remember this. The greatest discoveries are not always hidden in boxes. Sometimes they are hidden in the way you choose to see your life. Comment this word if this message reached your heart. Gratitude. And remember, the story may be ending, but your next chapter is still being written. The end.